Hello and welcome to another Passivlife video. In this video we're taking a quick look at the current situation regarding the Sono Xeon, the difficult situation it faces and how that relates to Lightyear and Aptera. First, a quick recap. The Sono Xeon, as many of you will already know, has been in development for some time. For those of you who don't know, the Sono Xeon was first launched as an Indiegogo campaign way back in 2016 as a solar-powered car for under €16,000. Now, all crowdfunding campaigns overpromise and underdeliver, and Sono was no exception. Sono did get off to a solid start, and soon after, Sono approached potential mainstream investors to help fund their production. At first this went well, as Sono had over €250 million in potential orders, so many investment firms were more than happy to front some cash, albeit with some compromises. All the investors that Sono approached wanted the company to ditch its philosophy and pop out a half-baked vehicle very quickly to cash in the profits. Sound familiar? It should do. Their story is eerily similar to Aptera's first attempt. Perhaps because of this, Sono knew what would happen, and they decided instead to fight for their beliefs and their morals. Facing a horrible choice of either being forced into betraying their backers or immediate financial failure, Sono took a leap of faith, and with only 30 days to raise €50 million, they relaunched their crowdfunding campaign. Under strict crowdfunding rules, this meant that if they failed to meet their target, all the money that they had raised must be refunded. They raised an astonishing $32 million in 30 days they were given, but that was not enough. They had failed for the first time. Sono asked for an extension, and thankfully the fundraising platform made an exception, and by the new deadline of the 20th of January 2020, Sono had raised €53 million and were back in business. But after many missed promises and 5 years after their initial launch date, and almost doubling in price, Sono Motors were eventually looking set to launch their Xeon in 2023, for which they should be heartily congratulated. To get even this far is an astonishing achievement, and essentially the hard part was almost over, except for one major problem. They had almost run out of money, or to put it more precisely, they have perhaps enough money to last 1 or 2 years if they're very careful, but nowhere near enough to get through production. But how did this happen? In a nutshell, they were simply too arrogant or too naive, depending on your perspective. Their initial cost estimates and timelines were wildly inaccurate, bordering on insanity. In turn, this meant that their financial plan was built on nothing more than dreams. As an example, the Sono Indiegogo campaign launched on the 5th of September 2016 offered the Xeon Urban for as little as €10,560, with an estimated delivery date of February 2017, giving Sono just 4 months and 27 days after the completion of their campaign to deliver the vehicle. How they came to this number is anybody's guess, but to call them optimistic would probably be the understatement of the century. Perhaps the most critical point, however, is the poor timing of their IPO or their initial public offering. Again, probably down to astonishing levels of optimism and their over-optimistic timeline. Ideally, their IPO should have launched just before production, giving them the financial power to push through the final stage. Instead, their IPO came far too early in the design process, and all the funding slowly bled away as the timeline got longer and longer. It is easy to call out mistakes in hindsight, and I do think Sono should be given a lot of credit for what they've already achieved, but the big two questions remain. Will the backers bail them out, and is Sono capable of delivering the Xeon? If I was a backer, I think I would be tempted to give them a little money, even knowing that there is a good chance I might not see that money again. It is a project worth saving, and if any backers are listening, I want to make it very clear that if Sono fails, you will probably lose any additional money you put in. So this is by no means an investment recommendation. The backers have come to their rescue before, but back then Sono's record was still untarnished. Sono Motors founders are now far more experienced, which is positive, and their route to production does seem clearer, but they still have openly admitted to making large mistakes, some of which seemed fairly obvious from the start, and that puts investors in a difficult position. On the one side, the Xeon will fail if the backers don't save it, but if they do invest their money, can they really trust Sono to deliver? At the moment, it looks 50-50. They have made some obvious and very ridiculous estimations in the past, but these new numbers no longer seem to be estimates. They are almost certainly based on official offers with some buffer built in. If they can get $100 million in new funding, I think they stand a good chance of seeing production. Everything now depends on money. But how does this relate to Aptera and Lightyear? To get a better understanding of the differences between Sono and the others, it makes more sense to look at their funding timelines, and this is where tactical thinking mixed with a healthy amount of realism becomes key. Now, I threw these numbers together relatively quickly from a number of sources online, and so they are by no means 100% accurate, but I wanted to give a rough overview of the funding progress for each company, and it clearly shows how Sono accidentally dug themselves a hole. So first up, Sono. They had a really good start, hitting their funding goal campaigns and having several successful funding rounds between then and now. The biggest of which was obviously the IPO in November 2021, raising $142 million in initial funding and a further $38.5 million later in the spring. Aptera and Lightyear stories are both very similar. Both companies have seen a similar amount of funding campaigns that have all been successful. If we look at all these things together, there are two very interesting things. Firstly, they are all essentially at exactly the same point, despite very different starting times. They are all just about to start production, and this is important because in any startup, efficiency is critical. The design phase of any project is expensive, but the production cost is the main problem. You need to get through the design phase as quickly as possible to preserve funding. Sono's leaders, being completely new to this industry and with very little experience in any industry, have not surprisingly struggled to get their vision going. They made mistakes and they learned a lot, and that's good, but it costs time, and time costs money. Lots and lots of money. By comparison, Lightyear and Aptera, who already had some experience, have been much more efficient. Their timeline is much more compact, and both seem to have overtaken Sono, despite starting much later. The second and perhaps most important point is the IPO. This is the most critical part of the funding process. It provides an enormous amount of capital in a very short space of time. In Sono's case, it provided almost 180 million euros over 2 rounds within a couple of months, and this is where the critical thinking comes into play. An IPO is like an ace up your sleeve that you can only play once. If you time it badly, then its power is lost. And in this industry, as a startup, that money needs to be used to cross the biggest hurdle, which is production. Unfortunately, Sono, in their usual over-optimistic manner, thought that they were very close to production, and they weren't. In fact, they were nowhere near production, and this money slowly vanished. Both Lightyear and Aptera have very wisely reserved this option, presumably for exactly this purpose. In fact, Aptera's CEO has even said so recently that this is their intent. This should enable them to break through production with relative ease. It is not a foolproof method by any means, and it comes with some risks regarding control, but if everything is set in place, well defined, and production is ready, then this risk is minimal. So to round up, Aptera and Lightyear are in a much better position, tactically speaking, than Sono are. The best of luck to Sono. Despite my negativity, I do hope that they make it. It is a project that is well worth saving. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you'd like to reserve an Aptera, don't forget to check out the link below. That'll save you $30 on the reservation fee, which is totally refundable. On a side note, if you're looking for a high-end VPN service, then please check out the NordVPN link below. That'll also save you a lot of money. They're a great service and I've been using them for years, not just to help protect my internet connection, but also to give me access to news in the English-speaking world, which makes videos like this possible. That's it, guys. Leave your comments down below, and I will see you guys next time.